We can't start yet, though, because I have to sneeze.
Okay.
No, don't you dare go away.
You've been robbed.
No.
I'm sorry, man.
Come on, give it to me.
You're making me have to sneeze.
Fuck, I'm so angry.
Snatched from the jaws of victory.
I know. And you know it's going to come back like the second we start the fucking episode.
Totally.
All right. Let's do it. Go Birds.
Go Birds.
Hello and welcome to Flanagan's Wake, a Doof Media podcast that has contacted Mike Flanagan from beyond the grave just to chat about his films for a couple hours. My name is Scott Daly and I am your host, and joining me as always my co-host who has just a few rules. Rule number 1, never play with him alone. Rule number 2, never play with him in the graveyard. And rule number 3, always say goodbye. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
It's going great. I just know you're not going to say goodbye, so
yeah,
I'm going to be sticking around for a while.
Yeah, nobody in this movie ever says goodbye to the Ouija board ever.
It's infuriating.
They make it seem like the worst rule they broke is that they unknowingly played it in a graveyard, but they never say goodbye.
I feel like if they had said goodbye properly, none of this would have happened.
I'm honestly though, I'm on Team Ghost. Like, people deserve a goodbye.
Yeah. It's a take I didn't expect going into this, but all right.
This week on the show, we are taking a look at the final Flanagan film of 2016. We're going to be looking at Ouija: Origin of Evil, the prequel to the original Ouija movie that came out in 2014. Matt, this kind of marks the end of, I guess we could call it the first section of our podcast, the first 5 movies of Flanagan's. After this, basically everything we're going to be doing from now until the end of the show is going to be an adaptation, with the exception of Midnight Mass, pretty much. So at least everything that's been released as of now, that could change, but we're going to be leaving the single film world behind and moving into the world of adaptation and TV adaptation. But this is the end of the beginning, I guess we could call it.
We've got to come up with some really pretentious names for like the phases of Flanagan's career.
I love it.
So this first sequence of films is obviously the first phase. It includes the Latin trilogy, but it also includes this movie and Hush. So I don't know. We'll workshop something. So something Latinate though.
We'll figure it out though, man. I'm feeling good though. It is Saturday night. We have never recorded a podcast on a Saturday night in the 10 years we have been doing this, but I got the flu earlier this week, and so I was not in any shape to record a podcast, let alone be on camera recording a podcast. So we had to push it. So here we are on a Saturday evening, ready to talk about an evil Ouija board for a couple of hours.
Yep, Saturday before the Super Bowl.
Yeah. I'm going to say go Birds here, and what I want everyone to do is, by the time you'll hear this, we will all know the outcome of the Super Bowl. And so you can either be very happy for me because I'm an Eagles fan, or you can be sad for me and for the world, frankly, because if the Eagles lose, it means the Chiefs have won 3 Super Bowls in a row, and nobody wants that ever.
I'm sure nobody wants that. Yeah.
All right, Matt, you want to get into it?
Let's get into it.
Let's talk about Ouija: Origin of Evil. Matt, what is this movie all about?
In 1967 Los Angeles, a widowed mother's daughter tries to communicate with her late father through a Ouija board, but unleashes a demon instead.
This movie was written by Mike Flanagan and Jeff Howard, is based on characters created by Juliet Snowden and Styles White, directed, of course, by Mike Flanagan. It stars Annalise Basso. Matt, she's back. I forgot. I watched this movie, and I don't think I realized when I originally watched this movie that this was the young Kaylee from Oculus has returned to us once again. She's back, and she's excellent once again.
Yep, she continues to be great. Excellent. Yep.
Yep, we also have Elizabeth Reeser, who will be another Flanagan regular. Actually, I could have sworn she was a Flanagan regular, but after this, the only other thing she will appear in is The Haunting of Hill House. So that surprised me. I thought she was in more things than this. But
Hmm.
Henry Thomas, a new one here in this movie, will become a Flanagan regular. He's in Hill House, Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, uh, Usher as well. I think he's just in everything.
Yes, I did recognize him for sure.
And of course, you know him from ET, right?
Oh my god.
I guess not. I guess I
No.
just told you something.
Yeah, you did.
And then we have Matt Lulu Wilson playing the young Doris Xander. Uh, wow, wow.
Yeah, so she kind of snuck up on me like over the course of the movie. Toward the beginning, I think you don't realize what essential character she's going to be, maybe,
Mhm.
and by the end, it's just like, holy shit. Um, it's great.
Yeah, totally. Man, lots to talk about here. I think where I want to begin with this one is probably the fact that, as we said, this is a prequel film to a movie that came out in 2014, a movie called Ouija. It, as we said, was directed by not by Flanagan, by Styles White, who's a director I had never heard of. He apparently wrote the Nick Cage movie Knowing. Do you remember that one, Matt? Do you remember Knowing?
I do.
Well, that was written and directed by. Actually, I don't know if it was directed by. It was definitely written by Styles White. So I had never seen Ouija, the first movie, but I watched it for the sake of this podcast because I wanted to come informed and ready to share my information with people. So I before I watched this movie that we're talking about today, I went back and watched the first movie. It's look, filmmaking. Filmmaking is very hard. It is very hard to make a good movie. I don't like to be a person who shits on all over movies because like nobody wakes up in the morning and says I'm going to do a bad job today. But this movie is not very good at
Hmm.
all. It's really not. It's the thing is it's not even like good in an interesting way in my opinion. It's just like a very bland teen horror movie that like really just goes through the motion, hits all the beats you would expect it to hit, and it's just not it's not very scary, it's not very interesting. It was pretty disappointing. Um
So my main question about it is like, is there a continuous and clear mythos between these two movies? Like, are there creatures and apparitions in this prequel movie that we're about to talk about that are, we're seeing where they came from, and that's why they're in the second movie? Like, is that
Very, very much so. Yes,
okay?
yes.
Okay.
The ghost monster of the Ouija board in Ouija is a ghost named. They first call her DZ, and it's later revealed that as Doris Xander.
Hmm.
It is originally we see a little girl with her mouth sewn shut, and we think that her evil ghost mother is doing that to her, and so our characters, in attempt to stop the haunting and murdering, try to help the little girl. And as we all know in horror films, Matt. Uh,
You weren't supposed to
you
help
weren't
her.
supposed to help her. So it's actually revealed that by cutting the ties on the mouth, you unleash the full scope of the monster, and that is the original Ouija movie. So yeah, the both the parent, Alice Xander, Doris Xander, the sister, and then the other sister, Lena, played by Annalise Basso, all are in the movie. So yeah, very very much so. It is a this is a prequel to that story, very much so. That doesn't mean that Flanagan didn't have kind of his way with who these characters were, why they were in the situation, what actually happens to get them in the situation. I think basically what Mike Flanagan said is the only rule that they had from Universal is the end of the movie had to end with Doris with her mouth tied, and that was pretty much it.
Hmm.
He could have done anything else that he wanted to do, and very much did, because Ouija Origin of Evil is a completely different movie from the first one. But this is really interesting. So Ouija, as I said, I don't think is a very good movie. It's kind of an uninspired movie. Um, it made a lot of money. It made
Hmm.
a lot of money. It cost $5 million to make, and it made $103 million worldwide, which is a huge amount of money for a movie of that size. That's a bona fide hit. That's making a lot of money. So it is unsurprising to me that Universal and Blumhouse said we got to make something else in this world. We got to do something else. It made a lot of money. That is unsurprising to me. What is very surprising to me is that they allowed the movie that is Ouija Origin of Evil to be that movie that they made in follow up to that movie. Because, you know, in this kind of thing, like you made a movie pretty cheaply, 5 million, not too much money. You turned a big profit on it. There is a very understandable desire there to just let's just do it again. Just spit out a movie as quickly and cheaply as possible, get it out there, boom, have it just do the same thing again. The Ouija board's bad. You use the Ouija board, it kills you in 7 days or whatever. And it's kind of astonishing to me that not only is that not what they wanted to do, but what they wanted to do is do what Mike Flanagan created here. Because Matt, they approached Mike Flanagan. They said, "Mike, we want you to make this movie." Um, and he was like, "All right, but this is what I want to do with it. This is what I want to do. I want to do like I want to get really into make it look and feel not only like it took place in the '60s, but that it was shot in the '70s. And I want to get really into that and do specific camera stuff. And I want to focus on this family and tell a family." And the whole time, the studio is like, "Yeah, cool, great." It's kind of astonishing to me that happened. And this movie, Matt, is kind of astonishing. What did you think of it?
Uh, I loved it. Before we leave the budget question, I mean, even this movie still it looks amazingly good given the budget. I guess is what I mean to say. It's not like it's not like Flanagan wanted to go all out and make a hugely expensive movie. It's like no,
Hmm.
he made a a very efficiently made movie that looks incredibly good. Uh, like I think just like the narrative is great, the acting is fantastic. We're going to talk about all that stuff,
Yeah.
but I think that the thing that slaps you in the face from like frame one about this movie is how committed he is to this aesthetic, where
Yeah.
everything from obviously like the costume and the set design to the color scheme choices, the color palette, the way we have cigarette burns on the frame, to you know,
Can I tell you a fun fact?
yeah, sure.
Um, do you know that nobody actually calls them cigarette burns?
Is that just a Fight Club thing?
It is literally just a word they made up for in Fight Club. I
That's
and
fantastic.
I'm not saying this as like from me being a superior. I knew this and you didn't.
Uh-huh.
I found this out while looking it up for this movie in preparation because I always just called them cigarette burns too,
Uh-huh.
as I think an entire generation did when they were pointed out by Fight Club
Uh-huh.
in that film. But no, that's just like a thing that I guess Fincher maybe just made up to be funny. Nobody calls them that. Or maybe just he called them that. I don't know. They're just
Yeah.
called like real change markers.
Okay.
I don't let me see the actual
Yeah.
it's a Q mark is basically what it's called.
Just in case people
Changeover Q. That's it.
Okay, so just in case people don't know what we're talking about somehow, on old movies, sometimes you'll see this where there's a clear mark on the film itself usually in the top corner of the frame, which you'll just see as a flicker. And in this movie, they put those in on purpose.
Yeah.
Usually I found it to be like, yeah, I guess this would kind of make sense as like a scene change is about to happen. So it would make sense for there to be a scene change mark here. Actually,
Mhm.
I was noticing that as we were going. It's not like there's just random. I'm going to keep calling them cigarette burns. You can't stop me. It's
No,
not.
do it. I mean,
It's,
it's fine. I just think it's
yeah,
hilarious.
it is hilarious. But that's just one example of like 10 million little things.
Yeah.
The lighting, uh, the I don't know,
I don't know.
literally everything.
Like
It's great.
sometimes I don't know how like much people care about stuff like that and like what does that actually mean. So I don't know how much like time we need to spend on like what do you mean by a changeover queue? Like what does that mean?
Uh-huh.
Um Essentially just in old movies they were on film, right?
Yeah.
And an entire movie could not fit on one reel of film.
Uh-huh.
And so the movie would come on multiple reels and each reel lasted about 22 minutes.
Uh-huh.
And then you would have to change over usually a theater projector system would run with a dual projector system. So you would have the reel that's currently running, and you would have the next reel set up on the next projector, and those spots were just there for the projector to notify them that, hey, you're gonna about to need to do a changeover. And that there would be two in succession. One would be like a warning one. It's like, in about couple seconds, the reel's going to be out, and the second one would be like, it's about to happen right now. And they would need to change over the reels. And so that's what it was. It was just a sign for the projector to prepare to switch to a different reel.
Yes, thank you. I abandoned my explanation halfway through, but yes, that's the purpose and yeah, so it makes it feel authentic, makes it feel like a much older movie than it is in all
Yeah,
kinds of ways. The other, I mean, just like the title card, not the title card, the studio, um, the studio. What's the word for this? I know the word for
it's
this.
just their like, oh my god, I'm blanking
The
on it too.
logo,
Their logo, yeah, their logo
the
at the start of the movie is Universal's logo from the 60s and 70s.
yeah.
Not the logo that you would see if you watch the Universal movie in 2016 or now. Yeah.
And then in the movie itself, there's a lot of homages and references to films of that era and horror films of the past, which I can't go through exhaustively because I'm sure I didn't catch all of them, obviously. But
I mean, the biggest and most obvious ones are like Exorcist,
mhm.
Poltergeist. Um, I think there's a some maybe not references, but just like stylistic references to like the Changeling, which is a 1980 film. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, this is very obviously like Mike Flanagan's like, these are like the horror movies that I watched as a kid, and I want to make this movie look exactly like those movies in
So
every way I possibly can.
what's funny or what's great to me though is like it always feels like a Flanagan movie in the sense of just extraordinary attention to detail and actually being really really creepy when it's trying to be creepy. And I guess the reason I bring this up is like I sometimes I feel like directors let homage get in the way of effectiveness.
Yeah.
And this was like the perfect textbook example of like, yeah, the we're doing an homage in this moment maybe, but we're doing it within like a coherent vision of how this is supposed to work dramatically and make you feel. Um, there are so many there's so many genuinely creepy and unsettling moments. I'm gonna try to avoid the thing where I just list all of the things that creeped me out, but
I mean, we have to do a little of that.
I think so. I mean, I think one of my favorite things that Flanagan does is the like small movement in the frame, and like your eyes move toward the movement, but by the time your eyes get there, the thing has already moved out of frame, so you don't get a good look at it. And
Hmm.
that's I think just the sheer creepiest moment, scene in the film is when the little girl is alone in the dark trying to talk to the entity. I think she thinks it's her dad at this point,
Yeah.
and she picks up the I keep wanting to call it a plectrum. I don't actually know what it's
It's
called.
a planchette, I think it
Planchette,
is.
that's
Yeah.
the word. What is a plectrum is a guitar pick. There you go. It was
It's
filed
similar
right.
shape.
Yeah, it was filed next to weird P word in my brain. The planchette, and she's looking around with the planchette, and I think it dawns on you gradually, like, oh, it's behind her,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and to the extent where you actually kind of know exactly what's going to happen when she looks in the mirror, but that doesn't make
Mhm.
it any less. If anything, it amplifies the anxiety because you're expecting it, and it's freaky.
Yeah.
That was my favorite sequence of the movie, actually.
No, it was wonderful. Um, I love this movie so much, Matt, and like I had seen this movie before, so like this was one of those ones where I didn't go see Ouija, the first one when it came out, because I was like, that's kind of a dumb idea for a movie. It didn't seem like it would interest me, and so I didn't go see it. And then this movie came out, and I really didn't pay any attention to it because at that point I really didn't know the name Mike Flanagan yet. And I mean, I had seen a movie of his or two, but I wasn't, drawing the dots together, connecting the dots. And then like people like kept talking about this movie after it came out. They were like, "No, no, you don't understand. Like they took a terrible movie, they made a prequel sequel, and it's actually incredible." And I was like, "That can't be true." And so I watched it, and I remember really liking it. I remember enjoying it, and thinking, "Yeah, they were right. This is a good movie." I was kind of unprepared for on this rewatch how much I loved it, and I think a lot of it was because I was appreciating it. Like I think this movie works on many levels, and I think that just appreciating it as like a straight movie, with storytelling and scares and feels and all those things. But I appreciated the filmmaking in this movie when I watched it in preparation for the show, like a lot more. Because
Mhm.
as you said, like he's doing homage, he's doing a lot of things, but there's some really really great filmmaking on display in this movie, that like put it up there with my favorite of these five movies we've talked about so far. It's which is
Mhm.
not what I expected at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's interesting. We haven't talked about this much because we've just kind of been taking the movies one at a time and talking about them on their own. But definitely, I think the ambition of what Flanagan is trying to do grows with each movie. Probably partly just due to the budget, but
Yeah.
I mean, in this case, it just feels like I don't know, it's just gotten better at all of the things from movie to movie. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to kind of maybe as part of this conversation, since we're getting to the end of whatever pretentious name we're going to call this first five. But he has obviously since I think when was Absentia, was it 2011? So this is 2016, right?
mhm,
So essentially within like a 5-year period has
mhm,
made five movies. None of them are like massive budget, right? I think this movie was about 9 million. I think Before I Wake was estimated around that amount, around 10 million. So he's like not like in the huge budget film range, but Adventure was $70,000.
yeah,
And this movie is just under $10 million. That's a pretty big jump in half a decade. We got to get off our asses, Matt. What are we doing?
yeah,
But I mean, I think it is interesting that you kind of like, if you're plotting his career on a chart, like you are kind of seeing steady progression upwards, right?
mhm,
Um, but without ever losing sight of kind of what makes what makes movies good. Like it's very easy to kind of lose yourself into exactly what I think the first Ouija movie ended up being, which is just kind of middling and kind of dull storytelling. But that
mhm,
doesn't happen in any of these movies.
yeah. So I think that offers a starting point for a conversation about the narrative. You know, the story,
Sure.
the drama of it. Like I found this to be an extremely moving, affecting story that really connected with me. I really cared about the characters. This is one. I think this is the one movie where I really wanted it to have a happier ending than it
Yeah.
did. Like in the previous ones that had a bummer ending, I was like, okay, that's super fucked up and awesome. Um, and it gave me that feeling of like, oh yeah, like that's exactly the perfect ending for this movie. And I'm not saying this movie didn't also give me that feeling, but I cared so much about the characters. I was so invested in these girls and their mom and their plight and the sort of injustice of the situation that I just wanted to see them get out of it somehow. And it was just like a complete loss.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, my heart.
Well, okay, so you're right. You're absolutely right. This is a movie that ends poorly, and I think this is a movie that ends poorly almost entirely because it has to.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
in like the fact that it is a prequel, the fact that Universal and Blumhouse are very clear with Flanagan. The movie has to end with the little girl dying and having her mouth sewed shut. Sorry, it has to end with her sister in mental institution, because that's where we meet her in the first Ouija movie. The mother is dead as well. Like those things have to happen. But I do think Flanagan, and he actually said this, that he fought for um, a little bit of like a silver lining happy ending, and
Hmm.
that we do get to see Doris, or I guess the spirit of Doris, the soul of Doris, um, reunited with her father at the end of the film, and the idea that Alice, as she dies, sees the two of them, and so like, yes, these horrible things happen. Yes, it's dark, and yes, like it's awful, but there's a little bit of a silver lining there that those three people got to be together.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That I think it's important, I guess, that you know that it's like it's not like the little girl is actually the entity. It is this demonic conglomeration of tortured souls that is sort of taking the form of this entity, I guess.
Yeah.
Actually, that was one thing I guess I was not entirely clear on. Not that it bothered me, but like, what is the black creature? Like, is this the ghost of the
Well,
Okay,
it's
so
Doug Jones.
it's Doug Jones.
Just the actor playing the
Oh,
black
okay.
creature is Doug Jones, who was in Absentia.
Oh,
He was.
okay.
I don't think he was the Canker Man in Before I Wake. Think we forgot to say that last week,
I
but
think okay. I
just
didn't. I didn't.
character actor Doug Jones, who plays the ghoulies and ghosts. Yeah, he was in both these movies. Um, no, I think the movie. So I'll attempt to explain this to
Okay.
you. And to, like the movie kind of says when Henry Thomas is going through the expository story that has been written down, the journal.
Hmm.
What he says is it's from one of the victims of this horrible doctor, and their souls where they were horribly murdered. Their souls they're trapped there in the dark, and amongst them was things that were never human in the first place.
Hmm.
So I think what we are supposed to believe is that this thing is part the souls of these horrible people, but it is part also some inhuman creature monster,
Hmm.
beyond anything.
Like a
um
demon or
yeah, like
something.
some sort of demon, yeah. And I think that's good because, like, one thing you don't want to say is the bad guys in the movie are horrible victims of an abusive monster Nazi doctor.
Yeah.
um
Well,
and the movie doesn't say that, right? Yeah.
correct. No, I think I got all of that. I think my only point of confusion was like, wait, is the ghost the horrible Nazi doctor? Is this the ghost? And I'm pretty sure the answer is no. Um.
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
I think it's just
Yeah.
supposed to be the demon.
Yeah.
Yeah. um Yeah, no. So I mean, what this movie is at its core is it's a story about three women reeling from the grief of losing their father and husband,
Yeah.
essentially, right? Like we start the movie. I think it was did it say it was 6 months have gone by since their father was hit by a drunk driver. I can't remember how exactly long they say it, but all three of these people are going through it in different ways, right? And we are introduced to this family. But I love the opening of this movie. By the way, the
Hmm.
introduction of this movie is so great. We meet our characters immediately as con artists
Hmm.
that are ripping people off by pretending to speak to their dead loved ones through parlor tricks and technology and mirrors and all this stuff. It's a great way to introduce us to the characters who are kind of playing at um, working through grief a little
Hmm.
bit here, because I think like there's a lot of conversation, after that opening scene where Doris asks her mother, like, well, are we is this a sham? Are we
Hmm.
lying to these people? And it's like, no, 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 we're using theatrics to tell them stuff that is the truth, to help them through what they're going through. um and so there's a lot of talk about helping people through their grief, but none of the characters in this family are like actually working through their grief in any way.
Hmm.
Because they're kind of, I think, blinded by the theatrics a little bit. And then we see that into when they actually get an opportunity to perhaps talk, they jump on it. There's a lot of similarities here, I think, between this and Before I Wake, about like, oh, we've just found some new um supernatural way of kind of shortcutting our grieving process, right?
Yeah.
Like, the mother in that movie sees the boy as a way of doing that, to get to help heal from her son Cody, and they do the same thing. There's actually an eerily similar line where Alice is talking to God, I always forget the names, to the elder daughter Lena, because Lena's complaining about how she's like, this feels wrong, and Doris is changing, and Alice says to her daughter, "I wish you would, I really wish you'd join us. It could help you heal." and that's like was eerily similar to what the mother in it before I wake said about this kid needs sleep, and if it can help us heal, then everyone wins, kind of thing. I was like, oh
Yeah.
man, this is very. I kind of got goosebumps at that. I was like, oh no, what you're doing here is bad. Actually, it's very bad.
Yeah, yeah. The idea of I like what you said, shortcutting the grieving process by, some concept that you can reach to the other side and actually talk to the person who's gone, or see them, and and this being, healing. It's like, well, first of all, it's probably not actually healing. It's probably, um you know a, a false bargain. um there's also, I think, a strand that it has been through all of the movies we've talked about so far, that involve a supernatural component, which excludes, I guess, Hush only at this point,
Hmm. Yep.
which is like, don't touch the supernatural.
Yeah. Don't
Like,
fuck with this stuff. Yeah.
don't like because practically anyone who has like scratched the surface of the supernatural in any of these movies comes to regret it in the biggest way possible. I think that
Yeah.
the only time that it wasn't just like the worst thing in the world was probably Before I Wake, and the woman still lost her husband out of the deal, so
Yeah.
it wasn't like they got off scot free. And I think that's really interesting. I think that this movie brings in the Christian imagery and themes more than any of the other ones. And we talked about, we kind of know where we're heading because we both watched Midnight Mass, and we kind of
Sure.
know this about Flanagan, but this is the first one I feel like it has more centered the religious idea, where kind of has the opposite pole of this idea of like the Ouija board and talking to ghosts and being a medium and doing this through the occult. We have the Catholic priest, who is a purely heroic character in this movie. There's
Hmm.
no dark underbelly to the priest's presence in the story.
No. Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
he's just trying to help. He's portrayed as being a very human, three-dimensional character. Where, I love, just parenthetically, I love the scene where he invites the mom to dinner, and she's like so excited, and she gets all dressed up and clearly thinks this is like a date, which there's some willful self-deception going on
Yeah.
here.
Alice, he's a Catholic priest.
Yeah, but also, like, he does like her. Like, I don't
Oh
think
yeah.
she's wrong in picking that up, but it's just a heartbreaking exchange because you come to understand where he's coming from, and that he's just like, yeah, this is not gonna happen. And then you
I
realize, yeah,
no. So sorry. Finish.
just you realize that's not why he invited her out to dinner, in the first place. So,
Yes, but it maybe kind of is too.
mhm, mhm.
You're right. Like that is not the primary motivator, but I think it's also true that there definitely is some chemistry and attraction between these two people, and I kind of love the movie gives us this little B plot with them a little bit, you could call it, right? Like everything else is going on, but the movie still makes time to show that these are two people who have lost their spouses, that are kind of struggling with that loss a little bit, one more than the other, I think. But they're just like a single people, lonely people in a world, in a hard, cruel world, that find each other, and it's not like a real super fleshed out little side story, but the conclusion of that story is when he has been, taken over by the demon, possessed by the demon, is charging towards her to kill her, and she stops him in his tracks. He comes back to himself just briefly for a second, just long enough to push her out the door and close the door and save her life, right?
Mm,
And that is kind of a nice, happy, because he immediately is pushed down the stairs to break his neck.
yeah,
um
Exorcist reference.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Um, Conclusion on their little story, though, and this is another reason I love Flanagan, is because he allows those kind of plots to exist in a movie like this, which they didn't have to.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect example. I totally agree that the priest could have been a purely functional character whose role was to show up and be like, "Yes, I have translated the texts, and this is the story, and then he could, hold up the cross and then be defeated by the demon, and it would just be like, okay, yeah, that was the expected plot beat there. But no, he was a fully human character. The actor does a great job with, um he doesn't get a lot of screen time, but he lands with the full weight of, like, yeah, this is a solid character in this movie. Doesn't have a lot of scenes, but he's very memorable. Like, I kind of already see why Flanagan likes this guy. Like,
Yeah,
he has a lot of, like, presence and charisma, but tailored to what the role actually is. It's subtle, it's
yeah,
dynamic. I like it a lot.
yeah. You're gonna love him in Hill House, and many many more things.
Yeah.
This is you're so right, and he's not in many scenes, but he is in like my favorite scenes because the the reading when he gets down and has his Ouija board reading with Doris, that and then the subsequent exposition dump scene are like two of my favorite moments in the entire
Hmm.
movie. They are both excellent, just tour de force acting performances, great directing, great camera stuff, just across the board. Just really wonderful shit. I think we'll dive into those maybe in a little bit. But
Hmm.
really remarkable stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just like, and then we haven't talked about Lena very much. But once again, we have Annalise Basso, who is continues to be remarkable, playing a kid who her kind of response to her father dying is to leave. Right, one of the first moments we see of her after the introductory story is her climbing out the window to go meet up with her friends and drink coffee and play with the Ouija board,
Hmm.
which they don't say goodbye to, by the way.
Yep. And that's where everything starts to go wrong.
Yep, it's all her fault.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she's the heart of the movie, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the little girl is the supernatural focus, and we've talked about her more, but she's actually the one you care about. You feel for her. The performance is fantastic. The writing is fantastic in anchoring you in this person and her struggles and her desires. That, like, she's the primary reason why the movie makes you actually sad. Instead of leaving you with that feeling of like, oh, that's a great horror movie stinger ending. You're just like, oh my god, this poor
Hmm.
girl lost everything and now she's in an insane asylum and probably just totally mentally broken herself too. The movie leaves it quite ambiguous, like what is supposed, like what actually happens in that last moment, which is totally fine. Like, I love the implication of, like, well, maybe she escaped. You're kind of telling me she didn't escape because the sequel, or the first movie, has her being in the asylum.
So yeah,
um
one thing also, if you it's a post credits scene
mm,
at the very very end of the credits where you have Annalise sitting there in the chair looking out the window in the insane asylum, and then she slowly morphs into the actress who plays the character
mm,
in the first movie, and that's like the end of the movie. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I think you're right to kind of be confused by by where we're supposed to leave that character in the end. By the way, I loved the moment in that ending where she peels back the carpet and then makes the Ouija board in
mhm.
blood. Like, I loved that. That was great.
Yeah.
I loved, like, from a technical perspective, the shot of little Doris running on the ceiling towards the doctor that ends the movie.
Mhm.
Like, that whole sequence when the doctor walks by and you see through the window that she's sitting next to her on the bed, then you turn back and she's not there, and but now is like standing right in front of the door, and then the camera just cuts like that. All is, from a creepy perspective, is marvelous, and I love it. Narratively, yeah, I was just kind of like, I kind of wish we just left her trying to talk to Doris and the Ouija board made of blood, and that's just where we could turned off the movie and ended it there. I think that would be not as, like, gnarly of an ending, but,
Mhm.
like, to a certain level it would be, because she's just sliced her hand up to make a Ouija board and is now desperately talking to her dead sister,
Mhm.
and not hearing a response or anything.
Yeah. And also the creature on the ceiling is not supposed to be her sister
It's
actually,
not. Yeah,
because
it's
yeah,
not Doris. Yeah.
yeah. No, I love the shot though. I love exactly where we cut with the girl has almost gotten to the doctor, and then we just cut. It's
Yeah, so
that's
in that shot, like it's that's a oneer, right? So
mhm,
like there's no cuts in that shot. The doctor walks by. There was a person dressed up to look like Doris in the room. When the camera goes by, that person ducks out of frame. The little girl who did her stunts, by the way, that is the little girl.
mm.
Is already on the ceiling at the beginning of the scene. She's already like hooked up upside down to the ceiling, ready to go, just out of frame. And so all that is a oneer, and it's a great fun scene. I can kind of totally understand why Flanagan was like, "Yeah, we're gonna do this. This is gonna be fun. I'm gonna have fun with this sequence."
It
Uh,
it's funny
yeah.
because I assumed it was CGI because, like, who puts a little girl on the ceiling?
Nope, that's her.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. I mean, it's interesting because her movement seems like unnatural in a way that's creepy, but it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's because it's going to look unnatural when you have a little girl harnessed upside down, probably on some kind of, rails.
yeah.
Who knows how? Yeah, it's great.
hmm
I love
hmm
that.
Um, let's talk about my favorite scene a little bit here. Let's dive into it. I want to talk about the reading sequence. So one of the things we talked about how Flanagan is very much trying to make this look like a movie that was shot in the late 60s, early 70s. One of the ways we haven't mentioned how he did this is he got like a set of antique lenses. So it's not the lenses that this movie was shot on. The cameras were modern, but the lenses were not. And that was, I think, part of the drive to get the effect of shooting. But
Hmm.
one other thing he does, Matt, is there's camera styles and techniques that have kind of fallen out of vogue now,
Hmm.
that were very popular back then, and one of them is zooms.
Hmm.
So and this kind of makes sense if you think about it, because like now if you want to like push in on a shot, you can just like a camera is very small and light,
Hmm.
and you can just push in on a shot. But when cameras were bigger and heavier and had giant reels of film attached to them, that was maybe a little bit more difficult of a proposition. And so the idea was you could just zoom the lens a little bit. And
Hmm.
so zooms were very popular, and they're not as popular anymore, but this movie uses a lot of zooms. I don't know if you noticed them, because what Flanagan does is he doesn't use like he doesn't do a lot of like racks, like where you're just twisting and like zooming in, and then rack focusing after that. There's some of that, but it's mostly just like set up a frame and then just like a slow push in zoom, and then you'll cut to another character or scene, and they'll be pushing in slow on, and that just like is a way of like ratcheting up intensity.
Hmm.
And the scene I want to talk about is when Henry Thomas's priest character goes to get the reading and is being told he's talking to his wife. And that scene, literally every time Flanagan cuts from one character to another, it's filled with these slow zoom ins, and the intensity of that scene is so good
Hmm.
because we don't necessarily know what's going on yet. I mean, okay, so we know a little bit more than the characters in that we know that she's been possessed by some demon. We watched a big black latex man stick his hand down her throat.
Hmm.
We've seen enough to like know that this is a possession movie at this point. Um, but we don't know exactly how things are working and what's going on and things like that. And so we're not sure what to make of that entire sequence, right? And I think Henry Thomas plays this so good because he's just got this like he, I think he just has like a forever smirk on his face sometimes, a little bit, like even when he's reading the story of all the terrible things that happened to this man who survived the war and then was later tortured and horribly mutilated and murdered and then turned into a demon. Um, he always just like it's just like Henry Thomas's face. I think just has like a little bit of an uptick
Hmm.
that just makes him seem like he's just kind of happy a little bit. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but like I think what it does is it does confound you a little bit, and draw you into the scene a little bit, and that and the zoom kind of you just kind of get
Yeah.
pulled in a little bit.
Right.
And I just that whole sequence I found very, very, very captivating.
Yeah, I mean, on the narrative level, he is pretending to be just I'm here for the reading and for you to be the medium with my dead wife,
Yeah.
and like there's a lot of subtext to what's going on because the demon, uh knows that something is off and knows that she's being messed with but isn't entirely sure what the game is, right?
Mhm.
And I think arguably by the end of that conversation, uh, she knows that this guy has pulled one over on her, and she's pissed off. And then, of course, they make the mistake of having their subsequent conversation in the house,
Yeah.
which means that she heard everything they said. Um, and then they're all dead, and then the movie ends with everyone dying horribly. But yeah, I agree. That was the the tension of that. It's funny you mentioned the thing about the zooming because I think I've said this at least once or twice before in conversation with you. Is that I generally find the slow push in thing to be distracting in
Mm,
movies, because and it's simply that I notice it, like, and then I'm like, and then I'm just reminded that I'm watching a movie, right? It's just
sure.
for some reason that's a camera movement that I notice, whereas most camera movements or cutting choices, I'm just like, I it's just that's just this is a movie. Why would I? Anyway, I didn't notice it, which to me means, or I don't remember it, right? Which to me kind of means that it was being used in a way that was so like in tune with what the scene was doing
Mhm.
that my brain just kind of accepted it as like, yeah, we're on edge. So like I'm maybe like literally leaning forward in my chair as I'm watching this, so it doesn't feel
Yeah.
unnatural at all. It feels totally fitting.
Yeah. No, it's really great. The other kind of special camera thing he does in this movie that is an old style one is the split diopter.
Mhm,
Um, Longtime listeners will remember we had a chat about this when we watched De Palma's Carrie because De Palma used a lot of split diopter shots in Carrie. He really, really liked them. But for those that maybe don't know, the essential function here is that the lens that is on the camera is kind of divided vertically in half,
mhm,
and each part of the lens has a different focal length. The result is that you can keep two things in focus at the same time, despite the fact that one is very close and one is very far away. Normally, if you wanted to focus on something in the foreground, the background would become blurry, and vice versa. But with split diopter, you can have a lens cut right down the middle, and it's used in this movie. There's a scene. I think it's when Alice first goes to the Ouija board to talk to her husband, just to see if he's there, and like Doris is just playing upstairs, and then suddenly she just looks up and starts answering the questions
mhm,
that Alice downstairs is asking to the Ouija board.
mhm,
And so Alice is, or Doris is on the right side of the frame. She's right next to the camera. Lena is in the background, like on her bed, reading or something. And that whole scene is a split diopter,
mm,
and
mhm,
it's a really fun like camera move. People don't do it very much anymore. But I really like it. And that was another thing where you're just like, oh man, I'm just on the wavelength of this movie. I'm just so into everything that it's doing here.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, totally. It's funny. I think most people, and I guess I'll include myself in this. To be fair, like we're not entirely sure what lenses can and can't do.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so when
I
you
mean, I'm not
see
an expert either. Please don't assume I am. I'm not at all.
and I suspect that like lens technology has gotten better over time, where like you can probably just have a lens that sort of can focus over a wider interval. I don't know. Not an expert on lenses,
Yeah,
but
some lenses have different lenses have different depths of field, right?
mhm,
Which basically means how much can be in focus at a time.
mhm,
Um,
gotcha.
yeah.
So didn't notice that stuff, but it is very cool. And I think even if you don't notice it consciously, it contributes to your sense of like this is a movie that is spiritually from the 60s or 70s when these sort of visual like you can't necessarily put your finger on what it is about the visual aspect that
Yeah.
you're noticing, but you're noticing the vibe and there's all kinds of stuff with lenses that like the aberration around the edges and stuff like that, where
Yeah.
you don't know that it's the aberration around the edges that you're noticing, but that it's the thing that makes it feel a certain way.
Right. Yeah.
um
Yeah. I mean, this is all the kind of the magic kind of tricks of filmmaking that, yeah, like none of these tricks are designed to be noticeable to
mhm,
the average viewer, right? The point is they set a tone, they set a feel, they set a move, they dictate the pace and the frequent, like it's just all things that kind of teach a person almost subconsciously how they're supposed to feel, what they're supposed to be anticipating, where the dread is, where you should be looking on in the frame, like all these things work together kind of silently in the background. And it's fun pointing them out when you notice them. But yeah, like I don't think these are things that the average film viewer needs to be aware of for sure.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of really interesting and fun stuff with the filmmaking, obviously, in this movie, because he's doing this throwback thing specifically.
Yeah.
But it's
But it's like the thing is, and I think the maybe what you're trying to get at here, the fundamental truth is if this was all layered on top of a story that wasn't very good with characters that weren't very interesting, none of it would matter. Like it'd be cool. Like it'd be cool to be like, yeah, that was a split diopter, but I don't give a fuck about these people.
yeah,
Like, okay, okay, cool.
right.
No, the reason this movie is good is not because there's a split diopter shot in it, or because we do slow zooms, or because we kind of attempt to one of the other things this movie does, I think, is a lot of the jump scare stings don't have like big loud musical stings in it, because that's a very modern horror thing, is to have like a big loud boom
Mhm,
sting to let you know that, hey, the scare's done.
mhm.
um this movie doesn't do that. And like, yes, it's fun to notice all these things, but yeah, the important part here is, are we caring about the characters? Are we caring about the story? What is the story doing and trying to say, and why is it working on us?
Yeah.
And it's not that those things don't add to that, but they're not the most important thing in my mind.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think thanks for framing it that way. It's there's a risk that I start to repeat myself, because I'm going to basically make this comment or some form of it about every Flanagan movie, because I consistently feel this way. But it's like he is very stylistic, and he does stylistic things, especially in this movie, because he is pulling in stylistic elements from other movies for the purpose of homage specifically, but he
Hmm.
never lets the style get in the way of the substance. The style is always in support of the substance. In this case, the substance
Absolutely.
being the narrative and the emotionality. And that didn't have, it never got in the way. Um, it's just a solid, very solid script. I know you probably said this at the beginning of the episode, but he did co-write this script, in addition to directing it, obviously. And it once again has all of those excellent qualities of a Flanagan script. I would love to dig into his like writing specifically. Like
Sure.
one of the pros and cons of doing the show like this is we talk about we sort of try to talk about every element of the movie at the same time.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is we talk about the elements that most caught our attention, but kind of underlying everything in a Mike Flanagan movie is the script. And if it's a Mike Flanagan script, it has very particular qualities. One of those is just like an extremely tight narrative and unparalleled scene writing and dialogue,
Hmm.
and then of course some of the what you could call idiosyncrasies, like a tendency toward monologues, which he of course employs to great effect. So it's not a criticism. Anyway, the writing in this movie jumped out to me as just like from scene to scene, every scene is just this perfect organism, that that communicates exactly what it needs to, and there's generally a lot of subtext to what's happening. Um, Even something as simple as like her going to her friend's house to drink Kahlua or whatever, uh, is is teaching you things about characters and the situation, through the subtext of what's happening,
Yeah.
why they're making the decisions they're making.
Yeah, I
Things,
mean,
yeah.
I completely agree with you. I want to give credit because I think one thing you said is Flanagan co-wrote this, and that is true. And that is true actually with a large majority of Flanagan's films, right? Like
Hmm.
this movie was co-written by a man named Jeff Howard, who also was a co-writer on Oculus and on Before I Wake, and will be his co-writer on Gerald's Game, by the way. And so we know Hush. He was also written by Kate Siegel. So yeah, I mean Flanagan is a writer, director, editor, very true. But he also likes to work in a team, especially on the writing front. He likes to work in a team. And I completely agree with you on the script. I think it's really remarkable. One of the things that I speaking of the scene where Lena goes out to play with her friend, yeah, there's so much subtext on what's going on hidden. Like it is actually an hour into the movie before like someone says their father was killed by a drunk driver. Like
Hmm.
we just we first we're not even told he's gone at first. We see a zoom in on a photo out that's sitting on a bench that has the three of them with their father, and then like so you begin to see maybe someone's missing here. Then we see Doris is praying not to God but to Daddy, and that Mommy doesn't pray anymore. Then we have the Lena going out sequence. One thing that I loved, and I don't, God, this is like what is writing, what isn't writing with movies sometimes. Like when Alice picks Lena up from the party, she's pissed at her, right? Like, cause she's her daughter was just out drinking, playing with a Ouija board at a party, and she has to go pick her up at maybe 2 in the morning. Um, we cut to the shot of Alice sitting in the car waiting for her to come, and we see her face in the side view mirror. That's how we see her face, and it looks like she's not like actively crying, but it like looks like there's like a little bit of a tear
Hmm.
in her eye, like that she's just been sitting there waiting and crying. Um, and then when Lena gets into the car, the cam like Alice looks back and the camera does this take to show that Doris is passed out in the back seat because of course when I have to go pick you up in the middle of the night, it's not just me, my life and my evening that you're fucking up. It's also your little sister.
Hmm.
All this stuff, I guess we could maybe call that writing, but it's like communicating character and subtextually setting up what the situation is between these three women or these two women and this little girl. And I just think it's very, very tight and sharp and great.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's what you're talking about right there is, I think, what is able to happen when you have one guy who's the writer and the director and probably the editor, because we pointed
Hmm.
out before that he edits pretty much everything that he does.
Yep.
Because it's like, yeah, in order to successfully and reliably convey that nonverbal communication, you kind of need to make sure that it's baked into the whole process, right? So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I think yeah, it's subtle, but that's consistently there's a lot of great visual storytelling in all these movies. But yeah, this one is maybe the best yet in that regard.
Yeah, and I think speaking of story and character, one of the things that I definitely wanted to talk to you about was so we have all this stuff happens. Um, Doris is kind of co-opted by her mother. You have this moment where they all sit down to talk to Daddy, and the the unbeatable question that she asks to prove that this is really her husband is, where was I when, or where were you when I told you that we were pregnant? And he says shower. She's like, oh, it must be
Hmm.
him. And she kind of just fully buys into it in a way that I found kind of shocking. I think actually one of the this is kind of an aside, but one of the things that I love that this movie does that I don't think the first Ouija movie did is like a Ouija board is essentially a fraud, right? Like they kind of go into in this movie how it works essentially, right? Is that you've got a bunch of people with your hands on a thing, one person moves it, and you kind of instinctually or subconsciously or whatever move your muscles to match the direction it was already going. And so it is all kind of a trick to begin with.
Hmm.
And then that this movie makes the trick of the talking to the supernatural, like one of the core tenets of it, both in that this is what Alice is doing, and then later at like this is what the demon is doing, is
Yeah.
it's just also tricking people, but in a different way than we expected. I think that's really cool. I really like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
the demon is promising people something that it can't deliver, just like they were,
yeah,
which reflects on, their own, mistakes and
yeah.
immorality.
But one of the sorry to get back to
Yeah,
my point is, she's shocked by this, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, we can actually help people. Like in a way we never could before. We can help people." Um, and I think it feels very important to Alice that she gets vindication that what she was doing wasn't fake. And now she can fully believe that it wasn't fake, it was real, it can help people, and maybe also believe that she can help herself. And what she does, her actual actions, is to pull her daughter out of school multiple days in a row and put her daughter to work helping people talk to the ghosts. Like, just kind of shocking, right? Like
yeah,
I just remember being really surprised when Henry Thomas shows up to Lena and is like, your sister's been out for 4 days.
mhm,
And in the past, when she's been sick, your mom has at least like called us and let us know she was sick. And I was like, wow, like she's taking her out of school to just like put her to work channeling spirits all day. That's a little fucked up.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're meant to understand that as soon as she believed that there was something truly supernatural going on here, she just basically abandoned all pretense at normality. And she's not even, it's interesting because it's not like she's thinking like, oh yeah, we're gonna milk this. It's almost like she just has become a zealot suddenly. It's like she's totally all in on this. She's a total believer. She I think maybe on some level even she sees this as a kind of um affirmation of her own choices, of like, oh, I was right to have done this seance stuff. Like, there was something to this because my
Yeah.
daughter is actually a medium, and we wouldn't have figured this out if we hadn't. It's funny because having seen the movie, you kind of know how wrong this is, so it's hard to put yourself back in the position of watching the movie for the first time. But clearly, from her perspective, like, it's just like, oh, my grandmother was a medium, and now my daughter is a medium, and she's
Yeah.
she's truly magical, and this is beautiful. This is like a spiritual gift. Like, you know, the afterlife is real, right? This is a woman who stopped praying, right? And suddenly
Yeah.
she's been given what she believes is unequivocal evidence that the afterlife is real, and essentially God is real, and essentially her husband is still out there,
Yeah.
and you know, death is not even a real thing. People, they're just waiting for us in the afterlife. So her whole worldview has turned upside down. She's basically a different person, effectively. And in that light, her actions make a kind of sense, although they obviously seem very extreme, especially since we know that nothing is as it appears to be, and she's basically been misled.
Hmm. Yeah. Great points. Uh, wh- One of the things I was thinking about this as well is I wonder if this is part like I was thinking about before I wake a lot with this because of the aforementioned quote similarities between the helping, the healing.
Hmm.
And we talked in that movie how like Cody needing sleep was this wonderful trap for her because she could justify
Hmm.
her drugging of this kid, to help herself as something that ultimately is helping the kid.
Hmm.
And I wonder, this isn't textual in Ouija at all, but I do wonder if part of Alice's like self justification of um, pulling her daughter out of school, putting her daughter to work, doing this thing that could be very dangerous, um, is a justification of maybe maybe in multiple ways. Like one, kind of reigniting their mother daughter relationship. Because one thing I haven't said about these characters in this movie very much is they all like, yes, they're all grieving in their own way, but they all seem very separated from each other.
Mhm.
Um, like we see Doris in front of the television a lot in this movie, and I think that is very specifically per Flanagan because for poltergeist references, right?
Mhm.
Like he's going for some poltergeist stuff with Doris in front of the TV, and that's great, and I love it. But also, I think it does kind of show a segmentation and a separation between these three women.
Mhm.
Or sorry, she Doris, a little girl.
Mhm.
These three girls where mom is like kind of on her own struggling to stay afloat with the bills, sister is kind of on her own, being a teenager, both trying to find herself and work through her grief at the same time, and Doris is kind of left to be parented by the television.
Yeah.
um and so my point with that is just I wonder if like, oh, we're doing this new thing and I'm going to pull you out of school and like, oh look, we're bonding in a way we haven't been able to bond before. But also, one thing we know about Doris is that she's very confused and doesn't fully understand what it means for her father to be dead and gone.
Mhm.
That's part of the "I'm praying to him" thing, and I wonder if part of Alice's kind of corrupted motivation of doing this is that, I'm helping her understand and maybe get to talk to her father, and ultimately that'll help her and it'll be better for her, even though I'm ripping her out of school and
Yeah.
putting her to work.
That makes a lot of sense. We talked when we talked about Before I Wake about the idea of grief quite a lot. And this adds, so that was grief regarding the loss of a child for a couple. And here we have kind of a permutation of that, which is the loss of a parent with a mother and children.
Hmm.
And in that previous movie that we talked a lot about, like what it does to the spousal relationship when the child is lost and how difficult that must be. And then
Yeah.
this is in contrast to that, this is what does it do to the parent child relationship when a parent is lost, because now you're in the position on the parent side of um having to deal with your own desolation and struggles while also helping a child navigate possibly their first exposure with the concept of death, which is at the best of times a tricky proposition.
Yeah.
Like I think there's specifically the scene where the little girl is praying, praying to her daddy. You can just see on the mom's face like a kind of like fixed, like I don't know. Are you ever just like so exhausted when you're putting your kids to bed that you just are just like forcing yourself to be pleasant and like
Yes.
and it, which is, I see that as kind of our duty, right?
Yeah.
Ideally
Sure.
you're not that exhausted and you're just having a fun time tucking them in, and everyone's being delightful, but sometimes that's not the case. And that's exactly like that's what I thought that scene that's how I read that scene, is just like she's physically and probably spiritually and emotionally exhausted, and seeing this for like the 100th time in a row, she's just doesn't even have the energy anymore to deal with it
Yeah.
and to argue against it, or to do anything really.
Well,
um
and if you are not working through the grief of the death of your spouse very well,
mhm,
right? Having your kid pray to your dead spouse every night probably doesn't feel great either. It's
mhm,
just like this constant reminder of this thing that you yourself haven't fully gotten yourself through yet.
mhm,
Because yeah, I mean, like when, and maybe it's just generally true when you are grieving and sad over the death of someone, even if it's an innocent child, like not fully understanding what death is probably pretty frustrating, right?
mhm,
Like we don't, again, this is nothing, there's no scene in the movie of this, right? But like you could just imagine what it's like. No, he's gone. Like,
mhm.
why won't you understand? He's gone.
Yeah.
And that's that. I mean, you could definitely see yourself getting exhausted by that for sure.
Yeah, and it's also just kind of a poignantly tragic and sad idea that like you tell a little kid, you know, daddy's in heaven now with God, and then the little kid's logical deduction from this is like, oh, okay, so now when I pray, previously I was praying to God, now I'll pray to daddy, and then be kind of confused when he doesn't talk back because
Yeah.
it's daddy. Why wouldn't daddy talk back? And then you as the parent, you're like, like I'm trying to help. I'm trying to
Yeah.
help. Nothing. nothing helps. This is now worse because
Well,
now I have this like metaphysical snarl that I'm not. I can't even. I'm just gonna. You know what? I'm just gonna let it happen.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, and you have co-opted your kids into your, cold reading scam.
mhm,
So I love when Doris asks the question like, all these other people's family members talk to them. Why isn't Daddy talking to us? And
mhm,
it's like, well, because we're lying to people,
yeah.
child. You can't say that. So yeah, yeah, completely.
Mhm.
Um, the one thing I don't think the movie ever comes right out and says either is like, I don't know how long Alice has been doing this, fake psychic stuff because, like, I mean, 1960s America, right? Like, it's probably just true that her husband was the primary breadwinner of the house, right? That he was that is I think we are to understand part of the reason why they are in such dire financial situations is
Mhm.
that he died and they no longer have his income coming in. And so maybe she just like picked up this mantle specifically because they were just desperate for money, and this is, her mother was a did this for real.
Mhm.
um and so she's like, well, I know how this works. I know how to fake this at least, so I'm going to do it. Like I didn't see any specific yes or no of if this was something she was doing prior to her husband's death.
I just assumed no, but you're right that it's not like the movie tells us. It does seem like the girls were probably not involved in, being her stagehands prior to recently because they
Yeah.
they they really seem to still be learning the ropes. And
Yeah.
in fact the older daughter doesn't really seem to want to be doing this at all anyway,
Mhm.
and finds the whole thing exploitative, and kind of can't keep in her temper. Like I think again, just talking about scene writing, like the fact that the fact that the way the whole first scene plays out, where she scares everyone on purpose, says a lot about her character and who she is and how she feels about this.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, she didn't like Kate Siegel.
she didn't like Kate Siegel.
Yeah, because she was trying to rip her father off.
Yeah, no, that was great.
Mhm.
Little Kate Siegel cameo worked fantastically.
Yeah, really liked it. Um, so I did want to talk to you about the exposition scene.
Mhm,
So we kind of teed up this a little bit when we talked about the cold reading scene, and then um, Henry Thomas takes the two of them upstairs into Doris's room. By the way, we like I love this whole sequence plays out. I didn't actually realize we were in the third act of the movie until you kind of notice that the sun is slowly going down during the entire course of the scene, and then by the time he's done with his expository dialogue, the sun has set, and then they walk down the stairs, and that Flanagan does this long one take when the three of them walk down the stairs. Um, that I think ends right before the boyfriend is hung.
mhm.
Um, that's really, really effective. And then you're like, oh shit, this we're in the end of the movie. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about that expository sequence because I wanted to kind of link up to our conversation last week and before about these long dialogue heavy exposition sequences and when they work and when they don't. What did you think of this one?
I thought it worked. It's being cross-cut with us seeing the little girl doing stuff, right?
Correct.
S
The entire thing is cross-cut with the boyfriend showing up
Mhm,
and her taking him down to the basement to show
mhm.
him where she found the money in the wall.
Yeah, so I think that, again, not to sound like a broken record, because I like the way Flanagan does exposition uniquely, whereas I think usually exposition is not handled well for whatever reason. I'm not sure exactly why, honestly. Flanagan usually manages it well, but here's a case where I think part of what makes it work is that we're cross cutting it with narrative moments, so it's not just an info dump. It's providing context as we're watching this inexorable nightmare unfold for the kid, and you want him to get out of it. Like, even him, but I know I'm kind of all over the place here, but like, he's a pretty minor character, but I was like, this kid is great. This kid is likable. He's you know, you buy that he likes this girl and that he's just a good kid. He's a good 1960s kid, and
Yeah.
he just wants to kiss the girl, and it's very pure and it's very earnest, and he doesn't deserve to be possessed and murdered. And I was sad. I didn't want to watch him die, and I was sad when he died. Uh,
There was an opportunity to make this like a dirtbag teenage guy
mhm,
character, right?
mhm,
Where
mhm,
like, yeah, he's like he seems like really doe-eyed and nice to her, and you know, yeah, we can go to homecoming, blah 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 blah. But then like you're just waiting for the scene where he like tries to get some and gets
mhm.
rejected and then turns into an asshole. And yeah, that never comes. That never comes, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're totally on board. I love the whole sequence of him just like there's a part there's a part of him like in some of his face acting where as he's reaching into this wall and pulling out stuff where you can kind of see on his face he's like, why am I doing
Yeah.
this? Why am I listening to this little girl
Right.
telling me to do stuff? But he's been just like so taken aback by her, partially because of the whole the whole long monologue where she talks to him about the experience of being strangled to
Uh-huh.
death.
It
Um, and so he's just kind of doing it, and I love there's that one part of it where in the background while he's digging in the wall, like she's out of focus and just
yeah.
starts like twitching
Uh-huh.
unnaturally and like, oh, it's so
Yeah.
creepy.
It kinda reminds me of that scene in Hush when the boyfriend of the woman from the neighbor basically comes
Mhm.
over, and you know that the guy he's talking to is the killer, but he doesn't, and you're
Yeah.
and you see that he's kind of cluing in that something is badly off, but you're just like, "Come on, like, get out of there or kill the guy or do something. Don't just go along with it." But in it and I think it's like in both scenes, you have this element where it's like the social nicety requires that you go down into the basement with the little girl, even though
Yeah.
every instinct you have is screaming that this is a bad idea. And I can just I know for some reason that's a really viscerally powerful concept to me. The idea that a person would walk into a situation that they know is a terrible idea because it's like, well, it would be rude for me to just refuse, and I don't want to be rude. Um,
I think that is very true to people though.
yeah.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, anyway, to return to your original question about the exposition, I barely even noticed that it was exposition because of how it's threaded with the scene that's happening in the
Yeah.
background.
I agree. I think first of all, it starts with him explaining everything that just happened at the cold read and
Mhm,
why and like how he found out that this is bullshit. And I found all that really captivating.
mhm.
It's great because you have the good like the playoff of Alice being like besides herself and like you're telling me my daughter is a fraud. And I was like, no, no, that's not what I'm telling
It's
you at all.
it's much
Actually,
worse.
it's way worse than that. Um, and then he starts into the exposition, and it first of all, it's an interesting and horrible story. Yes, the intercutting. One other thing I really liked in the blocking of that scene. There's a moment in the middle of the exposition where Alice like gets up and like turns away and like faces the wall and is not looking at Henry as he reads
Mhm.
and tells the story of the stuff that he just read. And I don't know, part of I like I think that consciously unconsciously does something to you when you're like shifting the blocking of the story and like watching as characters react to the story. It's not just you sitting there being told something,
Mhm.
you're seeing performances and acting in it. I also think like once again, like the whole during the whole sequence, we see the sun like start to slowly disappear in the background windows. And I think that is part of a mood setting thing that you maybe don't even realize that like I think distracts you from what's actually just like clinically happening right now, which is the movie is explaining to you all the things you need to know to go into the third act because we're about to go down into the basement. We're about to crawl into that little passageway and go into this mad doctor's torture chamber. And we need to understand what that is and we need to understand it quickly.
Yeah. Well, and crucially, it's not just explaining it to us, it's explaining it to the characters who don't know any of this. Like we're ahead of the characters because
Yeah.
we don't know what it was, but we saw some kind of black golem creature invade this little girl. So we know that what's been happening is not good, but we are curious, like, well, what is the nature of this thing? And so it is expositing for our benefit, but also getting all the characters on the same page prior to, now they need to take action based on that. So
Mhm.
to me, exposition is at its worst when it's purely for our benefit, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, it serves the dramatic narrative function of informing the characters of this information that
The
they need
worst
to know.
possible line of exposition you could ever write in a movie is, "As you know."
Right, right, right. Exactly.
Then why are you telling them?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with you. I really liked this. I thought it was very effective. I think again Henry Thomas's performance is just excellent as well. With it all, and then Matt, we move into our kind of climax in the basement. How did you think about how like the actual climax of everything played out? I'm kind of surprised that in a PG-13 movie we were allowed to, even without showing it, sew the mouth of a 9-year-old girl's shut.
I'm surprised by many things. I'm surprised we were able to watch a teenage boy be hanged on screen
Mhm.
and a woman be stabbed in the chest. I guess that's not so bad for PG-13, but yeah, little girl's mouth being sewn shut. Um, yeah, I guess they're just, yeah, they were just really careful about what they actually showed, right?
Even just like when the older sister like takes like a chair like in
Mhm,
a wrestling match to the little sister and just
mhm.
like breaks a chair over her head. I was like, that's a 9-year-old child. I mean, I know she's possessed by a demon, but are we allowed to do that?
That's great. No, I don't know. I mean, I think we are. I think the funny thing is that part of what you and I are having the same emotional reaction right here, right now, to being like, God, I can't believe they showed that. And the truth is, what's really happening is we are finding this to be extremely emotionally impactful, and,
Yes.
and we're kind of confusing that with it being graphic,
Hmm.
when in fact it is not graphic. It just is dramatically effective, and we're like, God, can you show that? And it's like, look, it's not the image, it's the content that we're feeling, and
Yeah.
and that's what we're shocked by.
Yeah. I mean, let's be clear here. The movie never shows her actually sew the
Mhm,
kid's mouth shut. Like
right.
Flanagan very cleverly, and you feel the weight of it though. I love like a as she's doing it, like the black demons are crawling over her, but like she keeps like pulling the needle up, and the needle like comes right back into center frame, just very dramatically each
Mhm,
time. Like it's really
yeah.
you
It's
feel every
it
stitch of it.
it's almost a um gosh, classic horror movie, Bates Motel, uh,
Psycho?
Psycho. It's almost the Psycho, um,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
except instead of the knife coming up and down, it's the needle, and it's one of those particular needles that's like a surgical needle, right? So
Mhm.
it's nasty, and you're imagining what's happening even if you don't see it. Just like Psycho, by the way, just like Psycho,
Yeah.
you never see the knife penetrate the
Nope.
woman, and yeah, now that I've thought of that, it's this motion that she's
Mhm.
doing, right? It's there's your reference right there. Um,
Almost certainly intentionally.
yeah,
But maybe not. I don't know. That's great.
I feel like it's intentional. Um, yeah, that was great. So, one of my kind of nitpicks about Before I Wake was that, like, I kind of figured it all out well in advance of the climax, and so it didn't land as hard for me. Whereas in this movie, we set up the idea that, no, Daddy was the one who sewed your doll's mouth shut, and at the time I was just like, okay, like, I don't understand enough about what's happening to know what to do with that yet. And then when they remind us of that at the end, no, Daddy sewed the doll's mouth shut. I was, oh, okay, like, I remembered, and I got it at exactly the moment when the movie wants you to get it, because that's when the character gets it and she
Yeah.
knows what she has to do.
I also really liked how that scene was done stylistically. It wasn't just like we do a look up and then flashback cut to the earlier scene.
Mhm.
It's like that old scene kind of invades the room.
Yeah.
Um I thought that was really effective. It makes it seem much more active instead of being a very passive like recall of we're really doing this just to remind you the audience of what happened. No, no, no. This is the we're actively seeing the character recall a previous moment. And then we see her father standing there holding the doll to really drive it all in because he is there. Like this is, I mean, one thing we'll say, I don't think we've actually said this, is that yes, like Daddy was here, right? He
Hmm.
was here the whole time, but he cannot talk. Like we never see this character actually talk.
Hmm. Yeah, right. Which is I like the metaphysics that this hints at, which is like, look, the good ghosts kind of know that their role is not to reach out across the veil and try to communicate and try to meddle in your life.
Hmm.
Maybe they do helpful things from time to time, but their role is not to be noticed and to draw attention to themselves. It's only the bad ghosts who actually whisper to you and reach across the veil wanting to actually, influence you and put words in your mouth.
Yeah,
That's a cool notion to me. um I like that a lot. I like that.
yeah. Man, I just like this movie. Like I just really, really like this movie.
Yeah,
Every bit of it was an absolute joy to watch.
yeah, I agree. Another downer ending, which is,
Hmm.
again, fine. But it's like you can't make me care about these characters so much if you're gonna kill them all. It's not fair.
That's
uh,
horror for you, man.
yeah, you're right.
I think this was probably like the most. I don't know, maybe you disagree with this sentence. I think this is me coming from a person who's probably seen more horror than you. This to me was like one of the most straight up like horror films that Flanagan has made in these 5 we've talked about.
Mhm.
And I think part of that is probably just coming from that this is a prequel to another teen teen horror film. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, I'm not saying that
Yeah,
like Oculus was not a horror film. I'm not saying that like Absentia was not a horror film. I don't think I think calling Before I Wake horror feels a little weird to me because I think much more is going on there. I think Thriller feels more
yeah.
apt for Hush than and maybe even Before I Wake a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert in the nuances of genre, but I feel like there are specific subgenres that all these movies fall into, and I think even at
Yeah.
the time we kind of compared them to other things where it's like, yeah, Hush is the home invasion subgenre of horror, right? And
Mhm.
Before I Wake, I kind of want to call like psychological horror slash thriller. Whereas this is a haunting, right? You said it earlier. It's a possession movie.
Yeah.
None of these other movies are really possession movies at all. Okay, Oculus kind of. Oculus is definitely a possession movie, but like in a way
Yeah.
that feels very different. Oculus is also like trope aware. So this is one thing I wanted to talk about. Is this is maybe the least like we're going to subvert all of your trope expectations than maybe some of the other ones were.
Yeah, and maybe that's what I'm feeling when I say it just feels the most like straight up
Mhm.
just a horror film
Yeah,
is that yeah, it's not really doing it. And I think part of that is because Flanagan doesn't want to subvert that he wants to play in them, right?
yeah.
He's calling these specific movies, these specific experiences that he had as a kid. Um so he doesn't want to play in the meta of any of this. He just wants to do it.
Right. The closest thing to a meta moment was the priest kind of pulling one over on the daughter, and even that, it's like it's not really meta. It's just clever. It's just a clever story moment. It's
Well,
totally within the story though.
yeah, what I love about it is like right before he goes into his explanation, he reads the passage from the Bible. I think it was from John that says like, there are many demons out there. Like you have to test them to make sure. And so he's kind of explaining this is why I'm doing this is
Hmm.
because I'm kind of commanded by by my God to when I encounter these things to test them to make sure. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think all that was really great.
yeah.
It's so funny that like when I heard that Flanagan was going to make an Exorcist movie, which he is going to make an Exorcist movie. I think it's supposed to come out sometime next year. Not sure exactly when. I had forgotten how much of just an Exorcist movie this was, and so I remember my reaction being like, "Huh, okay, I wouldn't have thought that, but now I'm like, oh hell yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't know that. I
Hmm.
didn't know that he was going to make an Exorcist movie. I'm excited.
Yep. Let me look up. We don't know much about it. It's called the Untitled The Exorcist Mike Flanagan Project,
Okay.
written and directed by Mike Flanagan.
I hope it's another prequel.
I don't I don't know what's happening. So basically what happened was um they made a movie, I think last year or the year before, called The Exorcist Believer. It was a David Gordon Green picture. He like successfully rebooted the Halloween franchise. It was a very successful new Halloween movie that came out a few years ago.
Hmm.
And so they brought him in to basically do the same thing with The Exorcist, and that movie tanked.
Hmm.
And then they were planning it as like the first movie in like a new Exorcist trilogy, and that movie tanked, and they were like, oh crap, um, maybe people don't care about this. What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? And I just know in like the kind of trying to figure out how to figure all this stuff out, it fell out that Flanagan was gonna make his own standalone
Hmm.
Exorcist film.
Okay. Awesome.
An all new story set in the Exorcist universe is all we know about it yet. That news came out a while ago. It's still slated for a March 13th, 2016 release. So about a year from now. We don't know anything about it. So this is one of those things that, like, in the world of filmmaking, we need to take every bit of news we have with a grain of salt, because sometimes things are just announced before they are finalized. Sometimes they fall through. All 100 different things can happen uh, in filmmaking. So I would love this movie to still happen. We'll see.
Yeah, we will see.
Yeah. All right. Before we go, Matt, I did want to just like kind of circle back around to something we started talking about at the beginning of the episode, which is this idea that these are 5 films. All of them are original Mike Flanagan stories, right? I think the closest one to not being an original Mike Flanagan story is this one, Ouija, but still comparatively to where we're going, um, an original story. And then we shift to the world of adaptations. Again, Midnight
Mhm.
Mass is the big outlier in this, but how are you feeling about this? I mean, my favorite things are still to come in the Mike Flanagan universe, but I'm curious what your thought on kind of the trajectory his career takes now, having spent time to go back through these original 5 things and watch them and appreciate them. What are your feelings?
Well, okay, so yeah, just to remind everyone, I hadn't seen um, any of these movies.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
So, and I had seen Midnight Mass. So I had a strong sense that Mike Flanagan is really competent as a writer and as a writer of original things. And I think watching these movies has reinforced and doubled down on that belief where it's like, yeah, he is an extremely creative mind. Like I almost feel like there's some other level of the tower where he was a screenwriter, and not necessarily a director, just because like he's so good at that he could have just made a career
Hmm.
as a screenwriter. It's a unique that in and of itself is a unique talent, obviously.
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny, he started as an editor before anything. He worked as an editor. I think he was editing for reality TV,
hmm,
while trying to make it. So editing is kind of the first, and then screenwriting and directing fall behind that.
that's interesting. I didn't know that. So yeah, just I guess I'm thinking about that because you framed it in context of like, well, he's basically going to stop. He's not going to stop being a writer, stop being a screenwriter, but he's going to stop being the vision behind the story and kind of behind what the thing the story is trying to get across. And I really like that part of his storytelling.
Hmm.
I like that he's able to tell like a psychologically rich story that also connects with some thematic idea to and then communicate that idea through the use of genre conceit, which is like exactly what Stephen King does all the time, right?
Hmm.
Like it's a very
Yeah.
like I feel very well equipped to talk about Flanagan's storytelling sensibilities after talking about Stephen King's for A Million Hours, because I think they're very similar. They're very aligned. So it makes
Sure.
a lot of sense then that he would move on to adapting Stephen King, because I think, I literally think he's like the perfect guy to be adapting Stephen King, because I feel like they have very aligned narrative sensibilities and like feelings about the role of character and theme, and how those ideas mesh together, um to make a
Yeah.
good story, and to achieve a dramatic effect.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one thing I will tell you without, ruining it, I think the ironic thing is that the two Stephen King movies of his that you've seen, and I know you have not read the books that those movies are based off quite yet, are I think the most straight up of his adaptations.
Hmm.
They are the ones that are the closest to the source material. I think one thing that we're going to find marvelous, and we are going to be reading The Haunting of Hill House. We are going to be reading The Turn of the Screw. We are going to be reading Edgar Allan Poe. We're going to be reading The Midnight Club. We're going to read all these stories that Mike Flanagan's works are based off of. But one thing in those adaptations, especially in the TV show stuff, you have to use the word adaptation very very loosely, because it is I think what I'll say about Hill House is I think The Haunting of Hill House, the novel, to Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House, is to Ouija, to Ouija Origin of Evil, in that he had a certain structure of a thing that he had to play in, right?
Hmm.
Like, this is what the story is. These are kind of the names and places and ideas. Um, but essentially, do whatever you want.
Hmm.
And part of the reason why we're going to be reading Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House is because I really want to dive into that, and I really, when we get to that story, and I think just the journey through adaptation that we're about to take here is going to be one of learning, you know, what makes him such a talented and successful adapter, right? Like, you know, the subjective quality of art aside, like, his adaptations do very well generally, and are
Hmm.
very popular and well received. So like, you can call those successful adaptations, right?
Hmm.
Like so what makes Flanagan a successful adapter? Um how does he stay true to maybe the feel of something, while while taking it in his own way, and getting to tell, like the haunt it is very important that you understand that The Haunting of Hill House, the television show, is such a Mike Flanagan thing,
Hmm.
that it uh, it is the most Flanagan thing that ever Flanagan. Like, it's great, and I love it. But like, knowing that you've seen Midnight Mass, I think you're going to eventually watch the show after having read the book and be like, man, this is Mike. There's Mike. There's Mike. There, like, it's all going to be there. And so
Hmm.
I think it's going to be a really fun exploration. I think we're starting it with Gerald's Game, which I think out of all of these adaptations is the one that is just kind of, at least narratively, the most straight up true
Hmm.
to King's story. Um, yeah, I think that's true. So I don't know, man. I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty excited about all this. Is there a part of me that says, like, you know, one day I hope Flanagan just says, okay, for the next 5 years, I'm just gonna like write my own completely original premise movie, and do it and make it, like, sure. But I also understand that he's a director that lives in uh, the world,
Hmm.
and the world decides what projects get what money, and things that are adapted from other properties are things that tend to get the most amount of money.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it's just the reality of things. It's funny, like, it's not like there was a huge latent audience of people clamoring for a The Haunting of Hill House adaptation, right? It's not like the Haunting of Hill House IP was just so hot, right? But
No,
but but
no, but
but he made it popular, right?
well, yeah, but I mean, but just like that, you're 100% true. But like, it is just also true that Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House would have done would just would do better than Mike Flanagan's blah 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 haunted house show.
Yeah. Sure.
Like it's just
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
having that name and that knowledge and that awareness, even if it's nothing like the book, which it is. Um, it's that remains important.
Mhm.
I'm bringing this up also because like I saw like when the news broke that Flanagan was going to be doing a Carrie adaptation. Um, I don't was that late last year? I don't remember exactly when it was. There were a lot of people that were like, "Oh man, like I want to see him do other stuff." I mean, there were some
Mhm.
people that were like, "Oh, Dark Tower." We're like,
Yeah.
Hang on,
Yeah.
guys,
Calm
not
down.
everything happens overnight." But there are some people that are like, "Oh, I want to see him do like Carrie's been done so many times." And me personally, I was just like, "Let's hell yeah, let's go, let's do it." Like
Mhm.
I just have faith in Flanagan's ability to adapt. Um, but I mean, I do think part of this is just like the reality of the industry as well, which is like why are we doing another Carrie movie? Well, because people know Carrie
Yeah.
really well. Um,
Yeah. Well, and also I think at this point, Mike Flanagan himself has enough of a brand that it's like, oh, a new Mike Flanagan movie that's going to be successful.
yeah.
Um,
Sorry. Yeah. Carrie is the television show, not a movie.
oh
Sorry.
yeah,
Sorry.
and that's even better because he's
Yeah.
made his reputation as the guy who makes the really great TV shows, right?
Yeah.
Um, no, that's really interesting. I guess this is one of those things where we'll have to put a pin in it and revisit it as we go because I I kind of think I know what you're talking about in some on some of these things, but I'm just gonna have to see the show to get a sense of it.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be really fun though. I can't wait. Just to remind everyone, if you are new here, the format of the show is going to shift a little bit here in the coming weeks after this episode. We are going to move on to reading a book. So for the next few weeks, we're going to be reading Stephen King's Gerald's Game. If you have followed us on Kingslingers, you know how we do this. We divide the book into like 100-page sections, and do an episode on each 100-page section. We walk through it. We do a detailed reading, kind of like a read along book club type thing. And then we finish up with the book, and then we'll be talking about the movie. So we're going to be in Gerald's Game basically till April.
Mm.
So uh, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. It's been a bit since I've read this book, so I'm looking forward to revisiting it a whole lot.
And I've started reading it because we have to record the episode relatively soon,
Yep.
and I'm enjoying it quite a lot. No surprise here. I'm happy to be
Mhm.
reading Stephen King again, of course, and looking forward to
Yeah.
talking about it with you.
It's gonna be. I've enjoyed these 5 episodes, which I think structurally are different from what we have done on this type of show in the past. But I am kind of excited to sit back into our old format, which is like a comfy chair that we've been in for years and years and years. And yeah,
Totally.
so yeah, next week will be chapters 1 through 8 of Stephen King's Gerald's Game. All right, Matt. But before we go for the week, we do have our discussion question section to discuss. So let's get into it. Let's read some questions and talk about them.
Yeah. So last week's or the previous discussion question, the answers to which we'll be reading now was, what is your favorite use of removing sound in a
Yeah, this
film?
came from Hush, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. We got a bunch of fun answers. So first, Hans Baka R23 Poe says, the first thing that immediately gripped my mind was the opening scene to Saving Private Ryan. When they land their boats and the fighting begins, the horrors of war and the battle shock sinks in. All sound becomes disoriented and drowned out. The camera becomes choppy in slow motion. It perfectly encapsulates what the character is going through in that moment. I rewatched this scene before commenting, and it still gives me chills. One of the greatest scenes ever put to film. Yes,
Yeah.
I've always found that to be, not that I've ever been in war, obviously, but anytime you're in a really scary physical situation, your senses go wacky, and it's the best, for my money, attempt at simulating kind of how you get a sort of tunnel vision, and how everything becomes a bit muzzy when you're in a bad situation.
Yeah. I don't think we can like underestimate and or undersell to people that were maybe not alive or conscious when that movie came out, like how much the filmmaking landscape shifted after Saving Private Ryan. Just like
Yeah.
everything they did in that movie, it just became the way you do war
Uh-huh.
in movies. Um,
Yeah. I
I,
mean,
it, yeah.
it's funny, yeah. Like the war being horrible. It's not like Spielberg invented the concept of war being horrible, but making it actually feel truly horrible in that way was unique. Um,
I also just we're like a broken people because like he did this the most harrowing, horrible like depiction of war ever. And then all of us were like, "Yeah, I wish I could play a video game that does the D-Day thing."
yeah,
And then all the video games in the world said, "Well, we can do that."
yeah,
And we all loved it. Was it
yeah,
a Medal of Honor? Like Medal of Honor series started after Saving Private Ryan, I think, and like the first game has essentially the Saving Private Ryan D-Day invasion as the
yeah.
first level.
Is it Vonnegut who said something like I'm butchering this, I'm sure, but like it's almost impossible to write an anti-war book because all depictions of war sort of accidentally glorify war. Um, and then he wrote
Um,
Slaughterhouse-Five. Anyway,
I think that's Vonnegut. I don't remember.
something like that. I may be mix. I may be crossing some.
The problem with quotes like these is that like so many things are just completely misattributed. You
Yeah.
know.
Well, at least I said Slaughterhouse-Five and not Slaughterhouse-Nine.
Oh, it was Truffaut,
Okay.
the filmmaker Truffaut. It's impossible to make an anti-war film.
Yeah.
Except, okay, it's attributed to Truffaut. He didn't say it.
Okay.
So,
That's great.
yep.
Well, I do know that Vonnegut's writing of Slaughterhouse-Five was an attempt to make an anti-war book, which
Yeah.
he considered to be a difficult undertaking. So
Yeah. No, it's impossible.
anyway,
All right. E-Man 9001 says, after giving this some thought, I'd have to pick the final bare knuckle boxing match from Snatch. The scene does a really good job of intermittently cutting the background music and crowd cheers in and out. But what's really brilliant to me is how the way exclusion of sound really mimics what it feels like to get your bell rung in boxing. When the most concussive blows are struck in the scene, the music and the crowd roars both suddenly stop. And instead of thudding leather sounds of punches being landed, we're left with a single background noise for all the fighters' movements. If I had to describe it, I'd say it sounds like a turntable being abruptly scratched in a wind tunnel. As the damage to our boxers increases, so does the shift of the sound of the film, with the added bonus of impact to the head being replaced with single frames of bright white light. By the ending exchange of the fight, we're left with almost no input from the surroundings and just a weird alien auditory interpretation of the boxer's movements. I love this movie, and if you ask a lot of other people who have completed or trained in combat sports, many will tell you that this scene best expresses what it's actually like to be in the late stages of a fight.
yeah, that's awesome.
Hmm.
I I
And
agree.
I know I've seen Snatch. I cannot recall this scene. I guess it's been a long time since I've seen Snatch.
Yeah, it's funny. I know there's bare knuckle boxing in that movie, but I don't remember the scene specifically. But you're making me want to go back and watch it, so I probably do that.
Hmm.
Awesome. Cool. Idolan Jones says, I thought I'd be quick enough to give the body from Buffy as my answer. So more fool me that they say that because Pear Jane beat them to it. But
Yep.
unfortunately, we're not going to read Pear Jane's answer. As a different response, I think I'd have to go with the hyperspace ram scene from The Last Jedi. I'm a sucker for any silent space battles, given how atmospheric and cool they are. But I think it was especially impactful given that this is Star Wars. Of course, there's sound in space there, but the hyperspace RAM works because it breaks that rule and says, oh, you're expecting a deafening boom? No, this moment is pure visual spectacle only. Feast your eyes, sucker. Seeing it in the cinema took my breath away, and the entire room going completely silent was incredible. Some people may not like the comparison, but as a fan of both films, I can't help but think, I can't help it. I can't help but compare it to the bomb going off in Oppenheimer. Another good answer to this question, I think, and how both scenes have this expectation of a loud explosion, but it instead um, but sorry, only to instead do the much more shocking choice of complete silence, providing pure visual wonder during a terrifying, game-changing scene. Yeah, 100%. I think I would even add to that both of those films have in common that you do ultimately hear the sound, but it's delayed. And for me, that has a psychological impact of hitting you with the greater magnitude. Like
Hmm.
the fact that it's delayed makes it feel more real,
Yeah,
and bigger for some reason. Um,
I agree. Yeah. Um, so there you go. Oppenheimer and The Last Jedi, equally good films.
yeah, sure, Scott.
No
Okay,
controversy there.
nope,
We love The Last Jedi here.
we do.
Yeah. All right. Alan the Alien 93 says, okay, so this is spoilers for Sopranos. Sopranos ended 30 years ago, maybe not. So if you care, please don't listen for the next couple minutes or so because these spoilers for The Sopranos. David Chase uses the concept of silence and death together throughout the end of the show. There's a scene where two characters are out on a boat fishing, and one says something to the effect of, "I think when you die, it all just goes black." Sorry if that's not the exact quote. I'm going off memory. So now to my favorite moment, the end of the show. If you know, then you know. It pissed off so many people, but I think it's beautiful and perfectly foreshadowed. Sorry, folks. Beep.
Um, Scott is censoring what was written there because he doesn't want to spoil it for everyone. Um, but
Beep. I agree with you, Alan.
you know, I've never seen that show, but I know I've watched most of it via 2-minute YouTube clips. So
That's really the best way of
yeah,
watching it, I think.
it's the
Yeah.
best way to watch any long form storytelling, I think.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, all right, Aqua Lungfish says, I'm going to go with the Halo drop scene in the 2014 Godzilla, along with much of the following scene. Basically, a group of soldiers has to parachute into an area of a city that has been devastated by Godzilla and the creature he's fighting. The scene starts with the men in a plane, so lots of plane noises. Once they jump, it cuts out everything but the wind and breathing as they fall through the smoke and dust covering the city, passing by the monsters. Once they landed, there is some sound happening, but what is notably missing is any sound of the monsters themselves. There are many shots where something happens, like Godzilla's tail sweeps over the heads of the soldiers without any noise. The way they move around in silence, despite their size, really adds a chilling layer to the events. Along these lines, a small thing that all these movies do that I love is how every time Godzilla charges his laser attack, there's a brief moment of silence between when it's fully charged and when it fires. It really makes it land a lot harder. Sure, yeah.
I think the Gareth Edwards Godzilla film is really good. I know that's a controversial take because apparently a lot of people didn't like this movie. But I did. I thought it was good.
I really like all the sounds that Godzilla makes. I like the Godzilla scream,
Hmm.
which is a very unnatural sound that they have very rightly embraced as just like the consistent sound of Godzilla over the years. I think they've tweaked it a bit from movie to movie, but it's basically the same, like sort of like multi tones playing at the same time. And this,
Sure. Yeah.
it's just a cool, it's just a classic cool noise, the Godzilla roar.
Yeah. And I think the Godzilla movies have like become absurd, but like in a way that I get why they're doing it. It's like embracing kind of the silly absurdity of, the Godzilla versus Kong stuff.
Hmm.
Um I mean, I don't think those movies are very good, but I get that they're fun. I don't know. You saw Gareth Edwards Godzilla, right? The
Yeah,
the
the
one
first one at
reference here.
least.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked this.
Yeah,
All right. That was all of them, right? Yep.
that was.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Lots of great answers in there, as always. Lots of great conversations. Lots of great use of silence. Even in this movie, even in Ouija Origin of Evil, I think there's some really great uses of. We didn't talk about it on the show, but there's like moments where all the only sound we hear is like the ticking of a grandfather clock
Hmm.
as Doris moves through the house.
Mm,
It's really really effective stuff.
yeah, no, so good. I love it.
All right, Matt, what are we gonna ask for Ouija Origin of Evil? What's our discussion question?
This next discussion question is what is a prequel that's surprisingly better than the original?
Maybe it doesn't have to be surprisingly better. Maybe it can be, of course, it's better. But yeah, I think this will be. I can think of a few examples, so
Hmm.
I think this will be a fun one
Yeah,
for y'all.
Star Wars Episode One.
Okay. Well, so show's over. We're ending the show now forever.
uh,
I will not tolerate this BS relitigation on the
yeah.
prequels as if they're good movies. They're
Y-
not.
Yeah, no, we don't have any patience for that on Doof Media. Um, we don't have a surprisingly vocal contingent of other Doof Media hosts who strongly disagree with us on this or anything like that.
It's
Certainly,
very upsetting. It's very upsetting. I used to consider these people my friends, and I just don't know what to do anymore.
yeah,
All right, folks, that is it for us this week. Next week, we've reached our first Flanagan adaptation, and thus we will switch gears and read a book. So our coverage of Stephen King's Gerald's Game begins next week with chapters 1 through 8 of the novel. So if you want to follow along at home, read the first 8 chapters of the book, and then join us for our conversation about it next week.
yeah. Remember, you can reach us via email at flanaganswakepod@gmail.com, or on Twitter at flanagan'swake19, on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia, which again is generally the best place to answer that discussion question. We have a Instagram at doofmedia, and we have a Blue Sky at flanaganswakepod. Uh, Also, don't forget that every episode can be found in video format over on our YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, please leave us a comment letting us know what you think of the show so far. Thank you.
And if you really like our cool logo and you want to wear it on your chest, you can go to doofmedia.myshopify.com and search for all of our Flanagan's Wake merch. We got mugs there. There's a blanket. There's a blanket now. There's a phone case.
Hmm.
There's a sticker. I'm gonna buy the sticker right now. I
All
like
right.
this. Yeah, there's tons of stuff over there. Doofmedia.myshopify.com. If you wanna help support us that way, that would be great. Lots of cool stuff there.
Yeah, thanks. And if you like our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. We just released a new episode of our bonus podcast on the TV show From. We're having a lot of fun watching that, and we're going to continue to put those out. A whole bunch more of those queued up.
Yeah, for sure. But of course, if you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is and always will be absolutely okay. There are tons of other ways to help the show that don't cost a dime. Please share the show with your friends. We're still pretty new. We're still just getting started here, and we want people to find us. So if you know of communities or friends or people that would enjoy a couple guys talking about Mike Flanagan for a couple hours each week, please share the show with them. Of course, the other way to help is by leaving us rating and reviews. Those continue to be huge for us. This week's spotlight review comes from Rhetorical Rin, who says 10 out of 10, no notes. Doof Media at it again with the bangers. I love everything Matt and Scott do. I'm a veteran constant reader. I've been following Kingslingers for years, and I'm so excited for this new journey. Episode 1 is top notch. Well, thank you, Rhetorical Rin. We're glad you enjoyed that episode, and hopefully episodes 2 through 5 haven't let you down much either.
Yeah, we appreciate your continued support.
Yeah, this is great. We've been having a great time. We hope you guys are too. But that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, Gerald's Game. Let's do it. We'll see you then.